Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is where history stops being a textbook and starts being alive.
Today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating human beings who ever walked the planet. A man who rose from complete obscurity to control an empire stretching from Spain to the borders of Russia. A man who rewrote legal codes, reshaped entire nations, and whose shadow still falls across the modern world whether we realize it or not. And yet, he also made some of the most catastrophic decisions in military history. Decisions so bad they almost defy belief, especially from him. We're going to cover 3 massive chapters of his life today. First, the rise. How a broke, bullied kid from a backwater island became the most powerful man in Europe. Second, the empire. What Napoleon actually did with all that power and why it still matters. And third, the fall. How arrogance, ambition, and a brutal Russian winter brought the whole thing crashing down. Buckle up. This one's going to move fast. Section 1. The Rise. Let's set the scene. It's 1769. A small, rocky island called Corsica in the Mediterranean Sea has just been sold by the Republic of Genoa to France, literally the year before Napoleon was born, which means that technically Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't even born French. He was born Corsican, and he grew up speaking Corsican and Italian before he ever spoke French. His family, the Bonapartes, were minor nobility, and I want you to understand what that means because it sounds more impressive than it was. They were technically noble, yes, but they were also pretty broke. His father, Carlo, was a lawyer doing his best to keep 8 kids fed on the island's social margins, but Carlo was smart. He saw something in his second son, this intense, serious, ferociously focused little boy, and he managed to pull some political strings to get him into a French military school on a scholarship. So at 9 years old, Napoleon Bonaparte left Corsica and arrived in mainland France, and the other kids destroyed him. His French was poor, his accent was thick, he dressed differently, he acted differently, he was small and scrawny and visibly foreign in a school full of children from wealthy French families. They mocked his name, they mocked his island, they called Corsica a joke. What did Napoleon do? He didn't cry, he didn't beg to fit in, he studied. While other kids socialized, Napoleon read mathematics, history, military strategy, especially history. He was obsessed with great commanders, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great. He didn't just read about them casually, he analyzed them. He asked why they won. He asked how. By the time he graduated military school and was commissioned as an artillery officer at age 16, Napoleon Bonaparte was already building a mental library of tactical genius that most officers would never accumulate in a lifetime. Now here's where history hands Napoleon his opening. France explodes. The French Revolution begins in 1789. The old order, the monarchy, the aristocracy, gets torn apart. Suddenly, the old rule that said you need to be born into the right family to lead armies doesn't apply anymore. France desperately needs capable military commanders, and it needs them now. Napoleon is 20 years old. He is hungry, ambitious, and one of the most talented artillery officers in Europe. His first major moment comes in 1793 at the Siege of Toulon. A French port city has been handed over to the British. The French army needs to take it back, but they've been failing for months. Napoleon, still a junior officer, essentially rewrites the entire battle plan. He repositions the artillery in a way that the senior commanders hadn't considered, targets a specific high ground position, and within hours of executing his plan, the British fleet is forced to withdraw. Toulon falls. Napoleon is promoted to brigadier general at 24 years old. The message is sent through the French military. This man is different. Fast forward to 1796. Napoleon is 26. He's been given command of the French army of Italy, which, by the way, is a polite way of saying he's been given a starving, demoralized, poorly equipped mob of soldiers and told to go fight Austria and Piedmont. His generals look at him. Some of them are older than he is. They're not impressed. What happens next is one of the most extraordinary military performances in history. In just under 2 years, Napoleon's army wins 14 pitched battles in Italy. He outmaneuvers, outthinks, and outfights forces that frequently outnumber him. He doesn't just win, he wins stylishly, with a speed of movement and boldness of strategy that leaves his enemies perpetually off balance. His signature move? Never let the enemy consolidate. Keep them moving. Keep them reacting. Never fight their battle. Always force them to fight yours. By 1797, Austria, one of the great powers of Europe, is signing a peace treaty on Napoleon's terms. He's 27 years old. Back in Paris, people are saying his name like he's a force of nature, a poet, an artist of war, and Napoleon knows exactly what he's doing. He's not just winning battles, he's managing his image. He's writing letters home that get published. He's painting himself as a hero of the revolution, a man of the people, a genius sent by destiny. The outsider kid from Corsica? He's not an outsider anymore. Section 2. The Empire. By 1799, France is a mess. The revolutionary government, called the Directory Zaïki, is corrupt, incompetent, and deeply unpopular. France is still at war, the economy is in shambles, people are exhausted. On November 9th, 1799, a date the French call 18 Brumaire on their revolutionary calendar, Napoleon stages a coup. He walks into the chambers of government with his brother Lucien and essentially says, "This government is over. There's some chaos, some shouting." Apparently, Napoleon himself nearly fainted from nerves at one point, which is one of those wonderfully human details history gives us. But within 24 hours, it's done. Napoleon becomes first consul of France, he is 30 years old, and he is now the most powerful person in the most powerful continental nation in the world. Now here's where the story gets complicated, and this is what makes Napoleon genuinely fascinating rather than just another conqueror. Because what does he do with the power? This is the part that often gets skipped in the Hollywood version of this story, but it might be the most important part. Napoleon was not just a general, he was, in many ways, a visionary administrator. And in the years between his seizure of power and the peak of his empire, he remade France from the inside out. Let's run through some of this quickly because every item on this list is genuinely remarkable. The Napoleonic Code. This is arguably Napoleon's most lasting legacy. Before Napoleon, France had hundreds of different local legal systems, a patchwork of feudal laws, church laws, regional customs, and revolutionary experiments. Napoleon commissioned and personally helped write a unified legal code for all of France. It established things like equality before the law, property rights, religious tolerance, and the abolition of feudal privileges. The Napoleonic Code became the foundation of legal systems not just in France but in Belgium, Spain, Quebec, Louisiana, and dozens of other places. You've probably lived under laws shaped by this document without ever knowing it. The Bank of France. Napoleon established a central bank to stabilize the economy and manage government finances. Modern France's financial system traces directly back to this, a national education system. He created the lycée system, a network of public secondary schools that standardized education across France. Before this, education was a chaotic mix of church schools and private tutors. Napoleon wanted a nation of educated citizens and competent civil servants, the Concordat. He negotiated a peace deal with the Catholic Church, which the Revolution had nearly destroyed. Whether you think that was good or bad, it was pragmatic. It stabilized French society enormously. I want you to sit with this for a second. This is a man who was simultaneously fighting wars across Europe and rebuilding the entire domestic architecture of a nation. Whatever you think about Napoleon morally, and we'll get to the complicated parts, the sheer scale of his capacity is genuinely staggering. In 1804, Napoleon goes one step further. He crowns himself Emperor of the French, and if there's one image that captures his ego perfectly, it's the famous painting of his coronation, in which Napoleon, instead of allowing the Pope to crown him, takes the crown from the Pope's hands and places it on his own head himself. He crowned himself. The message was unambiguous. I answer to no one. Not the church, not tradition, not history. I made myself. At this point, Napoleon controls France. He's made his brothers kings of various European states. His allies and puppet governments stretch from Spain across Italy, Germany, and into Eastern Europe. He defeats Austria again. He defeats Prussia so quickly and decisively that the Prussian state essentially ceases to function for a period. And then in 1807, he defeats Russia. He meets Tsar Alexander I on a raft floating in a river in Poland, and the two most powerful men in the world divide Europe between them like it's a dinner menu. Napoleon Bonaparte, the scholarship kid who got made fun of for his accent, is now co-ruler of a continent. So what goes wrong? Section 3. The Fall. Napoleon's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness. He could not stop. Every time he won, the victory revealed a new threat. Every time he secured one border, another became vulnerable. Every time he made a deal, he eventually broke it because the deal started to feel like a limitation. He was constitutionally incapable of consolidating, of saying, enough, this is sufficient. And the first place this truly bites him, Spain. In 1808, Napoleon makes a decision that even his closest advisors think is a mistake. He forces the Spanish royal family off the throne and installs his brother Joseph as King of Spain. The Spanish people erupt. This isn't a conventional military resistance, it's guerrilla warfare. The word guerrilla itself, meaning little war, comes from this conflict. Spanish civilians, irregular fighters, priests, farmers, they harass French supply lines, assassinate French officers, and generally make the entire country ungovernable. Napoleon sends army after army. He wins battles. He can't win the war. The Peninsular War, as it becomes known, drains French resources for 6 years. Napoleon later called it his Spanish ulcer. It never heals. But the truly catastrophic decision comes in 1812. Russia and France have drifted apart diplomatically. Tsar Alexander is no longer playing along with Napoleon's economic blockade of Britain. Napoleon decides the solution is obvious. Invade Russia, force them back into compliance. His advisors warn him, his best marshals warn him. He doesn't listen. In June 1812, Napoleon crosses into Russia with the Grande Armée, the largest invasion force Europe had ever seen, nearly 700,000 soldiers. The Russians don't fight the way Napoleon expects them to. Instead of standing and defending, they retreat, and keep retreating. Burning everything behind them, crops, villages, supply depots, leaving nothing for the advancing French army to eat. Napoleon keeps going. He takes Moscow in September 1812, which sounds like a victory, except Moscow is mostly empty and then someone sets it on fire. Historians still debate who exactly gave the order, but the result is that Napoleon sits in a burning, empty city, waiting for Alexander to come and surrender. Alexander doesn't come. Napoleon waits 5 weeks, 5 precious autumn weeks that he can never get back. And then, finally, he turns around. The retreat from Moscow is one of the most horrific episodes in military history. Winter hits, and when we say Russian winter, we're talking temperatures dropping to -40 degrees. Soldiers freeze to death standing up. Horses collapse and the men eat them. Men lose fingers, toes, noses to frostbite. They're attacked constantly by Russian cavalry and Cossacks picking at the edges of the retreating column. 700,000 men had crossed into Russia. Roughly 100,000 came back. Napoleon's mystique of invincibility, the thing that had kept nervous allies in line and terrified his enemies, is shattered. Europe smells blood. Prussia, Austria, Russia, Britain, Sweden, they form a coalition and come at France from all sides. Napoleon raises new armies and wins some remarkable battles even now, even with depleted resources, because even a diminished Napoleon is still one of the best military commanders alive, but there are too many of them. In October 1813, the Battle of Leipzig, the so-called Battle of Nations, sees Napoleon's forces outnumbered nearly 2-1. It's the largest battle in European history up to that point. Napoleon loses. By early 1814, coalition forces are entering France itself. In April 1814, Napoleon's own marshals, men who have followed him for 20 years, tell him it's over. He abdicates. He's exiled to the island of Elba, a tiny island, humiliatingly small for a man who once owned a continent. But of course, Napoleon can't stay retired. In March 1815, he escapes from Elba, lands in southern France with a small group of soldiers, and starts marching toward Paris. The French king sends an army to stop him. When Napoleon's tiny band met the royal troops, Napoleon walked out in front of his own soldiers, opened his coat, and called out to the opposing commander, "If any of you wishes to shoot his emperor, here I am." Nobody shot. The army joined him. He retook Paris without firing a shot. For 100 days, Napoleon was emperor again, until June 18th, 1815. A rain-soaked field in Belgium called Waterloo. He lost. A combination of tactical errors, bad timing, exhaustion, and the brilliant arrival of Prussian reinforcements gave the Duke of Wellington exactly what he needed. This time, the exile was more permanent. Napoleon was sent to St. Helena, a tiny island in the South Atlantic, so remote it barely appears on a map. Thousands of miles from Europe, thousands of miles from everything. He spent his final 6 years there, dictating his memoirs, crafting his legend, complaining about the British, and likely dying of stomach cancer, though some historians have proposed arsenic poisoning. On May 5, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died at age 51. His last reported word? France. So what do we make of him? Napoleon is one of those historical figures who refuses to be simple. He modernized legal systems that still protect millions of people. He spread revolutionary ideals, liberty, equality, the end of feudalism, across a continent, often at the point of a bayonet, which is a profound contradiction. He was a champion of meritocracy who crowned himself emperor. He was a military genius who made decisions of almost incomprehensible stupidity. He was, perhaps more than anything else, deeply human, magnified to a scale that most humans never reach. The writer Goethe met Napoleon once and described him as a demigod. Wellington, who beat him, said Napoleon's presence on a battlefield was worth 40,000 extra troops, and Wellington beat him. What I find most compelling is the beginning of the story. The 9-year-old boy who got off a boat in France and got laughed at, who decided that his response to rejection would not be to shrink, but to expand relentlessly until there was no room for anyone to look down on him. There's something both inspiring and terrifying about that, and maybe that's the real lesson. The same fire that drives someone to extraordinary achievement, if it never learns to rest, never learns to say enough, will eventually consume everything it built. That's Napoleon. We barely scratched the surface. We didn't even get to Egypt, or his marriages, or the continental system, or a dozen other fascinating stories. But that's the beauty of history. There's always more. If you want a deeper dive into any specific part of Napoleon's story, the Russian campaign, his relationship with Josephine, the political philosophy behind the Napoleonic Code, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one, and your suggestions directly shape what comes next on this channel. If this video gave you something, a new perspective, a story you want to tell someone else, that feeling when history suddenly clicks, consider hitting the subscribe button. Every subscriber tells the algorithm that this kind of storytelling matters, and it helps this channel grow. And if you've got a friend who thinks history is boring, send them this video. Let's fix that. I'll see you in the next one.